My parents bought a house for my sister with the money they had saved for themselves, but now they can't afford to live because I've cut them off financially. The reason I'm writing this is because I, at 33, feel financially exploited by my parents. My parents, my dad at 68 and my mom at 65, worked hard their whole lives and did the best they could to raise my 29-year-old sister and me. They gave us everything they could. We weren't rich, but they made sure we never lacked the essentials. They gave us a good education and a comfortable life. We had a decent life while I was growing up. But as we became adults, the dynamics in our family began to change, especially regarding my sister, Kayla. She had always been the golden child. While I grew up, she was spoiled and taken care of, while I was expected to be responsible and independent. My parents made excuses for her behavior, no matter how selfish or demanding she was. They would say things like, "She's just sensitive," or "She'll grow out of it." But Kayla never changed. Instead, she became more demanding over time. During her adolescence, she started asking for more, first clothes, then a car, and later money for expensive vacations. My parents always felt obligated, even when Kayla married at 21 to a guy who was just as demanding as she was. My parents financed her luxurious wedding. When I opposed this, they argued that Kayla didn't attend college and saved them tuition costs, so they should invest in her wedding. I asked why they didn't both work and fund the wedding themselves, but how could they? The guy was 24, and of course financially unstable. It was nothing less than a childish marriage. Despite using their savings to fund the wedding, Kayla never saw it as a favor. She thought, as parents, they were obligated to do it for her. On the other hand, I was expected to pay for my college and had to take out loans that I'm still paying off. But I wasn't complaining. I was financially successful. I worked hard, made good investments, and eventually landed a well-paying job. My parents retired when my dad turned 63 and depended partially on his pension and partially on the financial support I gave them each month. They said they had some savings for a rainy day, but I highly doubt they have anything because Kayla doesn't miss any chance to take money from them. I never minded helping them because I wanted to give back to the people who raised me. They needed help with bills, medical expenses, and general living costs, and I was happy to contribute. While I helped them with daily expenses, I always worried about their retirement life. Their savings weren't substantial, and with the rising life expectancy, I knew they could run out of funds. I was single and didn't have many responsibilities, so a few thousand didn't hurt. But eventually, I would have a family, and I didn't know how much responsibility would fall on me. So I set up a savings account specifically for them. Each month, I put aside part of my salary into that account to make sure they would be comfortable in their old age. I told them about it, and they were happy with my consideration. They also have access to the account. I deposit their monthly allowance into it, and they only use part of it, saving the rest. A few months ago, Kayla called me with what she called urgent news. She was pregnant with her child. I congratulated her because I was genuinely happy for her, but then the conversation took a turn. She and her husband had been looking at a bigger house in an exclusive neighborhood. It was way beyond their means, but Kayla insisted they needed it because of the new baby on the way. Then came the bombshell. Mom and Dad think it would be a great idea if you could help us buy the house. I was even more surprised to learn that my parents had this idea in their heads that I should buy her a house, as if my supporting them and saving for their retirement wasn't enough. I politely told her that I couldn't buy her a house. She insisted, but I reminded her that she and her husband were both working, so they should be able to handle it on their own. Kayla didn't take it well, so I called my parents, upset. They clarified that they hadn't planted the idea, but that Kayla had approached them saying she wanted me to buy her a house, and they didn't dissuade her. They said it was a matter between siblings, so they didn't intervene. I reiterated that I wasn't going to make an extravagant purchase, whether they liked it or not. My parents said it was fine. I thought the conversation was over, but it wasn't. A few days later, they asked me to come to dinner, which wasn't unusual, so I didn't think much of it. However, when I arrived, I realized the dinner was just an excuse. As soon as I sat down, they started pressuring me to help Kayla. Their argument was that she needed a bigger house, the kids deserved to grow up in a good neighborhood, and that, as the older brother, it was my duty to help. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents, whom I had been supporting for years, were asking me to drain my savings to buy my sister a luxury she couldn't afford on her own. I simply couldn't do it. I had my own priorities to consider. And while I was willing to help Kayla with smaller things, buying her a house was out of the question. My parents didn't take my rejection well. They tried to manipulate me, saying things like, "Your sister lives in a small, dirty apartment with 2 kids, and the third is on the way. The neighbors are hippies and suspicious. They constantly feel unsafe raising their kids in that environment. Don't you care about the safety of your niece or nephew? We've been hoping you'd give her a house for years, but since you didn't, we have to ask you." They said this as if there was some sort of unspoken agreement that I should take care of my sister's family. Naturally, I lost my temper and said that she should have considered her financial situation before bringing children into the world, and even before that, when she married so young to a man with no stable income. It's not my problem. She hasn't learned the lesson of raising 2 kids in poverty and now bringing a third. The discussion got heated, and I felt cornered, but I stood my ground. I told them that I had already helped enough and was willing to lend her a few dollars, but not this. In the end, I walked out of the dinner halfway because the conversation made no sense anymore. They weren't willing to understand my point of view. After that night, things became tense. My parents stopped calling me as often, and when they did, the conversations were cold. I know I haven't done anything wrong, but their reactions make me feel like the villain. I know my sister is in a bad financial situation, but would I be the bad guy if I don't help? Update 1. You won't believe what happened. A month ago, I noticed something strange. The retirement account I had been saving for my parents suddenly emptied. Every penny I had saved for them disappeared. I panicked, thinking the account might have been hacked or there had been a scam. I immediately called my parents and asked if they had lost the debit card or shared the details with anyone. Mom answered the phone, and when I told her about the theft, she was evasive. I realized something wasn't right. I asked her if she knew anything about it, and she denied it. However, when I insisted and said I was going to involve the police, she said she had lent the money to my aunt, her sister, because she needed it for a medical emergency. My aunt and I aren't particularly close, but I know she has had health issues in the past, so I believed her. Still, something didn't sit right with me about why Mom had lied in the first place. But I let it go. A week later, I was thinking about the money I was going to deposit into that account this month. I realized I should ask my aunt, as I hadn't spoken to her in a while. To my surprise, she told me that Mom hadn't been in contact with her for months. When I mentioned the money, she was completely confused. She had no idea what I was talking about and assured me she hadn't asked my parents for anything. I knew instantly what had happened to my money. I went home immediately and asked them directly, "You gave the money to Kayla, didn't you?" Mom tried to dodge the question, saying, "No, we gave it to your aunt." I got angry and told her to stop lying. I explained that I had talked to my aunt. Then, Mom broke down and confessed that they had given the money to Kayla to buy the house she wanted. My worst fears were realized, and I went crazy. They had given the retirement money to their stupid daughter. How were they going to handle their expenses in old age? They thought they had me, but I shouted, "You have me? Am I some kind of millionaire god that prints money in my backyard? What if I marry a woman who doesn't want to work and I have to support her? What about the responsibilities I'll have after I have kids? How am I supposed to handle all this?" Mom had no answer, but Dad stepped in to defend her. "Well, we had to do it because you refused to help. You rejected buying a house for Kayla. Remember, son, you can abandon your sister, but we can't abandon our daughter. She needs the house more than we need that money." I was stunned by his response. "Oh, really? She needs the house more than you need the retirement money? So basically, I'm a fool for having lived frugally for the past 10 years and saved this fund for you?" To say I felt discouraged would be an understatement. I was furious. All the money I had saved for them, their safety net, was gone, spent on a luxury that my sister couldn't afford. Yes, a house, a basic necessity, was nothing but a luxury for Kayla because she couldn't afford an apartment in a nice neighborhood. I told them that what they had done was incredibly irresponsible and that they had betrayed my trust. They tried to defend themselves, saying they had done it for the family, that they had no other choice, and that I had forced them into it by refusing to help. The manipulation was intense. They distorted the situation, making it seem like I was the one who had abandoned them, as if I were the villain for not giving in to their will. I couldn't believe it. I had been the one supporting them for years, and yet they were making me out to be the bad guy. I was on the verge of breaking down. I collapsed on the couch, not knowing what to do. Mom came over to calm me down, trying her emotional tricks to make me feel better. She told me that the new house's signing was in a week, and they couldn't take the money back from Kayla. I said, "Wait, the house hasn't been bought yet, right?" The poor me thought I could somehow save my hard-earned money. I tried to convince them of the importance of retirement savings, giving several examples of family and neighbors who died in poverty because of a lack of money. They were partially convinced, but they were either worried or too scared to ask Kayla to return the money. I said I would do it myself. Mom called Kayla, asking her to come over because there was something urgent to discuss. She came, and I tried to make her see that buying a house with the parents' safety net wasn't a good idea. Instead, they should save and buy something within their budget. But she's such a demanding woman. How could she let go of the money she had already stolen? She stood firm and said she wasn't going to return it. In fact, she said she had already made the payment, so she couldn't return it. Our discussion turned into an ugly fight. I stood firm and told my parents that unless they withdrew the money and put it back into the retirement account, I would cut them off financially. No more help with bills, no more money for food, nothing. I didn't want to do it, but I felt I had no other option. They needed to understand the consequences of their actions. Kayla came to the rescue, assuring them not to worry, that she would take care of them if I cut them off. She said it so casually and dismissively, as if it wasn't a big deal. But the worst part was that my parents clung to her words like a lifeline. I knew very well that it wasn't true. Kayla had never been responsible for anything in her life. She was used to receiving, not giving. I warned them they were making a huge mistake, but they wouldn't listen. They were convinced that Kayla would help them, and nothing I said could change their minds. I can't imagine how naive they are. Kayla and her husband can barely make ends meet. How are they going to take care of our parents? Moving to their own house from the apartment would save them rent, but that money is barely enough to take care of our parents. Plus, they would have a mortgage to pay. The money my parents gave her would cover barely 40% of the price. But she's delusional. Not only her, but her husband also has zero financial planning. The confrontation left me dizzy, and I finally walked out, saying that from now on, they should not count on me for any financial needs. A couple of weeks have passed since then. I was hoping for some kind of miracle, that they would withdraw the money, but that hasn't happened. Kayla is now the proud owner of her luxurious house in an exclusive neighborhood and can't stop flaunting it on social media. Update 2. First of all, because I've been asked about it a lot, I need to clarify that I can't sue. Well, I can, but the chances of winning are zero since the money was a gift to my parents. There's not much I can do. It was in a joint account, but they could withdraw from it whenever and however they wanted, and there was no contract stating that the money could only be used for specific purposes. They decided to waste it on my sister, and these are the consequences. And believe me, I've talked to 3 lawyers, and they all told me the same thing. We can go to court, but at the end of the day, you'll just keep wasting your money. But going back to the update, it happened exactly as I predicted. Kayla didn't keep her promise, and my parents came crawling back to me, just as I promised. I cut them off, not just financially, but altogether, which I hadn't mentioned before. But the truth is, the relationship between us has been damaged. For weeks, I felt bad and conflicted, but I knew I had to stand my ground. I couldn't keep enabling their bad decisions, especially when they chose my sister's whims over their own financial security. Kayla was in cloud 9 after buying the house, of course. During the first few months, she covered some of the monthly expenses for her parents. I knew it wouldn't last, but I hoped I was wrong, for her sake. However, it didn't take long for everything to start falling apart. Kayla and her husband quickly realized the numbers weren't adding up. How could it be? She doesn't have a stable job. Her husband's job is stable but not well paid, and the cost of the mortgage, utilities, children's education, and raising them started piling up. Within months, they were struggling to make ends meet. The logic of using rental money to cover other expenses suddenly didn't work. They soon maxed out their credit cards and asked my parents to manage on their own because they could barely afford a decent meal. Now my parents had saved a little from the money I used to lend them, and they used that, but when it ran out, they started calling me again. First with subtle hints about how tough things were, then with more direct requests for help. I felt terrible for them, but I stuck to my decision. This was exactly what I had warned them about. After talking to them a few times, I started ignoring their calls and messages. I don't feel good about it, but I'm sticking to my position for my own peace of mind. I know I'm being fair and reasonable, but it still hurts to see them suffer. Update 3. I have to say, there has been a lot of drama. Where do I even begin? A week ago, I got a call from my mom. At first, I ignored it, but she insisted and sounded desperate, so I answered. Her voice was trembling, and she told me that Kayla had sold the house and moved out of the city. I asked, what happened after I cut off the financial support? My parents went to see Kayla and gave her an option. Either pay the monthly allowances she used to provide or return the money they lent her to buy the house. Kayla, who should probably be called Karen at this point, argued with my parents, but this time they didn't back down. Eventually, she agreed to pay them a monthly allowance. A month later, Mom contacted Kayla to ask for the money. Kayla delayed for a couple of weeks and then suddenly disappeared. Her phone was turned off and she had blocked us all on social media. When my parents went to her house, it was closed, and there was some painting work going on. They inquired and found out that the house now belonged to someone else. Apparently, Kayla had sold it and left to avoid paying the money back. Mom cried, saying they regretted making the wrong decision and didn't know what to do. It was heartbreaking to hear that they were in trouble. They wanted me to help them financially as I had before. I wanted to help, but I was hesitant because I felt exploited. I said I needed time to think because I had other priorities. I've been dating a girl for 5 months now, and I think I'm ready to take the relationship to the next level. We want to move in together, find a spacious house, and maybe get married next year. All of this requires money. A week later, I went to see them, and they repeated the same things about how Kayla had disappeared. I reminded them that I had warned them about this and had tried to protect them from this situation. My dad tried to argue that it was my responsibility, but I told him that the responsibility is mutual. They chose to trust Kayla instead of me, and now they had to face the consequences of that decision. I was shocked by how entitled they felt to my money, as if there were some unspoken rule that I had to cover their expenses despite what they had done to me. They tried to emotionally manipulate me, saying they raised me, and now it was my responsibility to return the favor. I responded, I agree, and I tried to pay you back, but you made the wrong choice. I'm done being a source of income. They refused to accept that I was right and that they shouldn't have betrayed my trust and acted behind my back to help Kayla instead. They gaslighted me, saying this situation would never have happened if I had bought the house for Kayla. I realized it wasn't worth arguing with them, and it was better to stay away for my own peace of mind. I said, you shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you. You made a choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. Then I left the house. A few days have passed since that conversation, and I haven't heard anything from my parents since. I know they're struggling financially, and it hurts more than I can express in words. I never wanted it to come to this, but I had to take a stand. I had to show them that their actions had consequences. They spent their whole life enabling Kayla, and I don't think they'll ever change. As for Kayla, I have no idea where she is now. We haven't talked since she abandoned our parents, and honestly, I don't care. Update 4. I'm doing this update because everyone has been asking me for one. It's been a while since the last one, almost 2 years, and many things have happened in my life. Although I don't think it matters as much to them as it does to my parents and my sister, I'll give a brief update on my life and then move on to the important part. I've gotten married, and I've also moved in with my wife into a house. Don't worry, we learn from mistakes, and this time I've signed a prenuptial agreement. As for my parents, my dad has gone back to work. Yes, he came out of retirement to earn more money. He could spend his whole day fishing or doing whatever he wants, but he decided to waste that opportunity to help my sister, which only reinforced his behavior. But that's not the worst of the situation with my dad. There's more. My mom is also working, so to speak. She doesn't have a formal job, but she's taking on some sewing jobs and things like that, which gives her some extra income. This is because my dad's job isn't as good as it used to be, so their income isn't enough, especially because of my sister. I also have news about my sister. We now know that she's moved to another state. We found that out shortly after she sold the house, as the money from the sale was clearly not going to last long. Between the sale expenses, the mortgage, and other debts, it barely lasted her a few months. That's why she got back in touch with my parents and, as expected, she asked for money. But since it's no longer my money, it's money from my dad's work, it doesn't matter to me anymore. The last I heard, a little over a year ago, is that my parents were still helping Kayla. It was around that time when we stopped talking to my parents. We only spoke sporadically after my last update, and that stopped when they started helping Kayla again. Honestly, that doesn't bother me anymore because it's no longer my money they're using. I'm not going to deny that I wish I could get my money back, but even if my parents worked the rest of their lives, they would never be able to repay me, let alone my sister. So, I've cut all contact with them, and I haven't heard from them since. They weren't at my wedding, neither my parents nor Kayla. But that's what I know has happened with my family, at least until I stop talking to them. If there have been any changes since then, I wouldn't know. Update 5. 2 months later. It's been 2 months since my last visit here, but I've discovered something new and I suppose some people might be interested. My sister is getting divorced. My aunt, who doesn't talk much to my parents, if she talks to them at all, still has my sister on her social media. She told me last week when I called her to wish her happy birthday that my sister posted something about her divorce. There aren't many details beyond the announcement, but I can't say it surprises me. That marriage was doomed to end. First, because of the financial problems that are always an extra burden on any relationship, but second, and more importantly, because they are two spoiled children. And sooner or later, something like this was going to happen. Like I said, I don't have the details, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of them has been unfaithful or something like that.